Hello, this is TGC Requiem. I'm here with a deck tech on Kiki Chord. I will note that I don't have a ton of reps with this deck. I mean, I've played it maybe 30 matches or so with this. It's a lot of fun, and uh, I just wanted to maybe put a new deck tech together just so people kind of know how the deck works if they haven't run into it, and kind of outline maybe some of the newer technology in the versions that you might see out there today. The deck's called Kiki Chord primarily because of Kiki-Jiki, the Mirror Breaker, um, and Chord of Calling. So essentially, Kiki-Jiki has the ability, he is a legendary creature with haste, that when you tap him, you can create a copy of a target non-legendary creature. That token has haste, and you can sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. When you pair that with Restoration Angel, you can essentially create infinite number of Restoration Angels and attack for lethal. Very similar to Splinter Twin. The difference here is that um, Restoration Angel is a 3/4. You don't need to create as many tokens, which is nice. But Restoration Angel is just an inherently stronger card than like Deceiver Exarch or Pestermite were in the Splinter Twin combo. And I mean, essentially, what they would do is tap or untap a creature, with flash, or tap or untap a target permanent. Restoration Angel, however, has flash, has flying, actually is somewhat difficult to remove, can't kill it with lightning bolt, requires some work to kill it with fatal push, and again, Path Exile obviously can get it. But Restoration Angel offers a lot of other value in the fact that it can flicker, essentially exile a target non-angel creature you control and return it to the battlefield. So you can flicker creatures that there's attempted removal on. So say your opponent were to try and kill a Wall of Omens, you can have Restoration Angel flash it in response to their removal, target the Wall of Omens. The Wall of Omens leaves the battlefield, comes back. You get to regain the value of the enters the battlefield ability here with Wall of Omens drawing a card, and then your opponent's removal spell fizzles. So again, Restoration Angel just inherently more powerful. Kiki-Jiki, I don't want to say inherently worse than Splinter Twin, but costs a lot more. You would occasionally see one Kiki-Jiki in Splinter Twin lists, but the fact that it costs 5 CMC, the fact that it costs 3 red in that cost, the fact that it's a 2/2 creature made it subject to a lot more removal, and therefore just not as popular as Splinter Twin. So that said, kind of the concept behind this deck is that you have Chord of Calling to get these different pieces that you need to build up to this Kiki-Jiki Restoration Angel combo. However, because the deck is full of value creatures and the ability to use the toolbox that Chord of Calling offers you, to get different creatures for different situations, the combo is not required. If your opponent plays scared of the combo, you have enough value to essentially win the game straight up. And if they have to tap out, or you put them into the pressure of having to make decisions that kind of open them up to the combo, you also have access to just comboing them out for the win. And so that's the general concept behind the deck. In terms of some of the card choices here, basically Path to Exile, just to give you a little bit of interaction. Obviously there's lots of creatures that can cause problems, so that's just for that. Birds of Paradise is it's mana fixing, but it also helps ramp you out ahead of schedule. Very important. Some people will run a Noble Hierarch or two in these lists as well. I'm personally not a huge fan of getting over 5 mana dorks at the 1-drop slot almost ever. Elves, I kind of make an exception, but generally speaking, I just want more more useful cards that aren't dead if you don't draw the supporting cards. And so 4 Birds of Paradise is what I typically run. At the 2-drop spot, you have a variety of creatures. It's important to note, especially because we are playing Eldritch Evolution, and in this build for Eldritch Evolution to only 3 Chord of Calling, that we are trying to essentially have a little more value when your creatures enter the battlefield. So if I were playing 4 Chord of Calling and no Eldritch Evolution, I might not have any Wall of Omens, and I would probably have 3 Wall of Roots. If I'm trying to maximize my Chord of Callings, Wall of Roots is a phenomenal card because it can effectively tap for 2 mana towards a Chord of Calling, because you can right-click, or you can use its activated ability to put a counter on it to get a green mana, and then also tap it towards the Chord of Calling. So it really helps you ramp out. Because I'm playing Eldritch Evolution, and I have this intent to sacrifice creatures to go get other creatures, I want to get some value when that creature enters the battlefield. The other reason I'm doing this is the addition of the new card from Aether Revolt, Renegade Rallier, which has the value ability of, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, return a permanent card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Wall of Omens, with its enter the battlefield ability, if I were to return it with a Renegade Rallier, is going to get me an extra use out of that card. I don't have a lot of other ETBs at the 2-drop slot specifically, but Renegade Rallier has extra synergy with Voice of Resurgence, and even Kasali Pride Mage for that matter, which we can get into more in a minute. So point being, again, how you build your deck, if you're running 4 Chord of Calling, if you're running no Eldritch Evolution or a very small number of Eldritch Evolution, it's going to affect how you set your deck up here. So Scavenging Ooze is just in here as a general good card, good against graveyard decks, good in grindier matchups to gain you life and put a large threat on the battlefield later in the game. Wall of Roots, as we talked about, is a really excellent way to ramp ahead with your Chord of Calling, or just, again, ramping ahead in general. It's doubly good with Scavenging Ooze as the Wall of Roots ability to put a 0/1 counter on Wall of Roots to add 1 to your mana pool is something that can be activated each turn, meaning yours and your opponent's turn. So against Dredge, you could eat, a card on your turn, and then also eat a card on your opponent's turn. Wall of Roots does get smaller and smaller as you do it, but this is another one of those value plays with Restoration Angel, where Restoration Angel can flicker it and bring it back as a new 05. Kasali Pride Mage is just there to help your creatures get a little extra damage in with the Exalted trigger, but more importantly give you a way to handle destroying artifacts or enchantments that may get in the way. Voice of Resurgence, excellent against blue decks, makes it really hard for them to, or difficult, painful, for them to use counterspells or removal on your turn. Makes them more likely to do it on their turn, which in essence, gives you a little more freedom on your turn. And this is because whenever Voice of Resurgence dies, or if your opponent casts a spell during your turn, you get a XX elemental creature token, where X is power. Essentially, the elemental's power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. So if you have multiple creatures, it gets pretty big, and it's not uncommon to see your Voice of Resurgence get up to 8/8 in this deck, because this deck does a good job of getting a lot of creatures wide onto the battlefield. This is another one of those cards that offers value to Eldritch Evolution, though it's in a different manner. So with Wall of Omens, it's the enter of the battlefield. You've already gotten something by the time you sacrifice it. Voice of Resurgence is a little different. When you sacrifice it, you get something. So when it dies, you get a token. And so you can use Eldritch Evolution, sacrifice the Voice of Resurgence, and then you get, at worst case, a 1/1. However, if you sacrifice Voice of Resurgence to the Eldritch Evolution and get a Pia and Kieran Nalar, Pia and Kieran enters the battlefield, creates 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, and then you have an extra ability to sacrifice those artifacts for damage to your opponent or a creature your opponent controls. When you sacrifice Voice of Resurgence, you get the token. If you go get a Pia Kieran, you also get Pia and Kieran and 2 more tokens, which means you sacrifice your Voice of Resurgence to go get this 4-drop on turn, as early as turn 2 potentially, or turn 3 typically, and then so in a way you've kind of ramped ahead, but you also end up getting a 4/4 token out of the deal. So obviously that token can get smaller or bigger as creatures die, but that's the point. Eidolon of Rhetoric doesn't really enter the battlefield or give value when it leaves the battlefield. It is specifically in here as a bullet to help fight decks like Storm, the Cheerios or Pure Steel Paladin combo. It helps slow down a deck like Grizzshoulbrand, where they're trying to cast multiple spells in the same turn to set up their combo for the win. And because those decks are really popular right now, I do have this card main decked, though it frequently will be a sideboard card. It's also good against Snapcaster, as when they cast their Snapcaster, they can't cast the flashback spell because they've already cast their spell for the turn. So we can play a slow 1 spell at a card, or 1 spell at a time game better than those decks. Those decks are trying to cast multiple spells a turn to win the game, and so right now it's a very good bullet, but frequently, depending on the metagame, the sideboard card. Eternal Witness. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So Eternal Witness is excellent. Another ETB, enters the battlefield ability, and it's important to note, while the emphasis is on this 2 CMC jump with, you cast your 2 CMC creature, turn 3 you could Eldritch Evolution one of these creatures to jump as far ahead as getting a 4-drop. We kind of have the same concept going here at 3, where we ideally have some value coming in, but it could be sacrificed to go get your 5 drops. You still can get your 4 drops, but you can also get your 5 drops. You also have Birds of Paradise, which potentially from 1 CMC you could turn 2 an Eldritch Evolution on your Birds of Paradise to come get these 3 drops. So Eternal Witness is excellent because when it enters the battlefield you can return any target card from your graveyard to your hand. The most common value play with Eternal Witness is with Court of Calling. You can Court of Calling for an Eternal Witness. When Eternal Witness enter the battlefield ability triggers, your Court of Calling is already in the graveyard, and so you can return the Court of Calling to your hand, and then ideally use it the next turn to maybe go get a Restoration Angel. That Restoration Angel enters the battlefield, bounces your Eternal Witness, flickers it, re-enters the battlefield, and you can get your Court of Calling back again. And then ideally use the Court of Calling to get your Kiki-Jiki and win the game. So, that's a chain that can happen. I wouldn't say it happens super frequently, but it happens enough to be something that is an integral part of the deck. Fulminator Mage, there are a lot of big mana strategies. It's not always going to be a great play, but you can use it to, blow up Inkmoth Nexuses, go get it where that may be important. Again, against Tron decks, Valakut just gives you a way to fight those decks and hopefully delay them long enough for you to either combo out or just beat them down regularly. And again, it offers you that value when it enters the battlefield of being able to destroy something. Renegade Rallier. So when it enters the battlefield, as we mentioned, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, return target permanent card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this can with Eldritch Evolution, because Eldritch Evolution is causing you to sacrifice a permanent, can enter the battlefield. And so what I'm saying here is if I sacrifice any of my 2-drops or my 1-drop to go get Renegade Rallier off of an Eldritch Evolution, when Renegade Rallier enters the battlefield, I can go get that card back. The best example I can give here is Voice of Resurgence. If I sacrifice a Voice of Resurgence to my Eldritch Evolution to go get Renegade Rallier, I get a 1/1 token. My Renegade Rallier enters the battlefield, I now have a 2/2 token. The Renegade Rallier returns the Voice of Resurgence, I now have a 3/3 token, a Voice of Resurgence, and a Renegade Rallier on the battlefield. Potentially that Voice of Resurgence is going to give me more tokens, etc. Similar play, Renegade Rallier could go get you a Wall of Omens, draw another card. Again, this is all assuming you sacrifice it off the Eldritch Evolution. You also can get lands with the Renegade Rallier. So you could, if you wanted to, sacrifice a creature, use that Renegade Rallier instead of getting another creature to get another land to ramp you ahead, because it returns to the battlefield, not to your hand, which is what Eternal Witness does. It returns the card to your hand, which is also excellent with sometimes you need matchups where you need the Path to Exile and you need to grind your opponent out by killing all their creatures or exiling them. Eternal Witness is great with that. Renegade Rallier does not do that, but again, Renegade Rallier returns the card to the battlefield, so you could, as early as turn 2 even, use Birds of Paradise, play a fetch. When you crack your fetch, permanent has left the battlefield. You could just hard cast Renegade Rallier, enters the battlefield, return the fetch land to the battlefield, and then you have another fetch that you can crack, potentially to use to cast something else that turn. Also just to have a mana, be a mana ahead, essentially an extra land drop. It also pairs really well with something like Ghost Quarter. This deck is dry color, a little hard to fit Ghost Quarter, but there's definitely been some green-white decks running Ghost Quarter with this, where you would blow your opponent's land up, play a Renegade Rallier, return the Ghost Quarter, blow another land up, which is pretty filthy. But again, there's value here with essentially all of these cards. You can use Renegade Rallier to return a Kasali Prod Mage to blow up extra artifacts. You could use a Renegade Rallier to reset a Wall of Roots back to an 05, just to return a Scavenging Ooze that died, or Selfless Spirit, etc. So, Court of Calling is your way of going to get creatures. The nice thing about Court of Calling is that it's instant speed. Your opponent could load up Cranial Plating on their Inkmoth Nexus. You can then use Court of Calling, tap your creatures down to go get a Fulminator Mage to blow it up during the combat phase. Your opponent could try to kill a specific creature of yours. You can Court of Calling to get a Restoration Angel to flicker that creature, say, like an Eidolon of Rhetoric, so that way the creature lives and you've fizzled, their attempt to break up whatever key piece is disrupting them. So Court of Calling, the fact that you can use creatures as mana sources essentially, and the fact that it can be played at instant speed makes it a very powerful card. However, it does require a lot of mana and or a lot of creatures on the battlefield. So this is why we're running 3 over the 4 Eldritch Evolution. Also, Court of Calling can be looped with Eternal Witness, as I mentioned earlier. Eldritch Evolution, once you cast it, it's exiled. And since this deck is more trying to abuse the Renegade Rallier interaction, specifically with Voice of Resurgence and or Wall of Omens, that's why we are playing 4 Eldritch Evolution over the Court of Calling. Again, we also mentioned Eldritch Evolution can take you from a 2 to a 4. So maybe you need to stabilize against burn. You can kill your Voice of Resurgence or Wall of Omens to go get a Siege Rhino. Gain 3 life, make your opponent lose 3 life, and have a difficult to handle creature on the battlefield. Against a deck like Affinity, you could crack your Voice of Resurgence to Eldritch Evolution to get Pia and Kieran, which not only gives you 3 creatures on the board, 2 of them are colorless and flying. Colorless important as it helps you fight Etch Champion. Again, you can also get Restoration Angel. Again, you're not always going to be going turn 2 creature, turn 3 Eldritch Evolution into one of these 4-drops. As the game goes on, you may draw an Eldritch Evolution on turn 5. You may already have 3 creatures on board. Your opponent goes to kill a specific creature. Again, like we said, maybe your Eidolon of Rhetoric, that's shutting them down. You can, you're not going to build Eldritch Evolution into that, but maybe you just need to get an extra card, you're drawing dead. You could Eldritch Evolution your Wall of Omens, or some other 2-drop like a Voice of Resurgence to go get your Restoration Angel so you can flicker your Wall of Omens, draw a card, etc. So, 4 drops we kind of talked about. The best thing here is that Restoration Angel can actually flicker Pia and Kieran to get you a bunch of extra colorless Thopters. Can flicker your Siege Rhino for recurring life gain. Can flicker your Renegade Rallier to both trigger Revolt and cause, ideally, another creature to return to the battlefield, or, worst case like a land, and ramping ahead is your worst case. That's pretty good. Restoration Angel, again, can flicker Eternal Witness to get a card back from your library, Wall of Omens to draw a card, and then any other creature, again, just to protect it. Except for itself. I guess you can't Restoration Angel another Restoration Angel. Kiki-Jiki we already talked about. Kiki-Jiki also works well with cards like Siege Rhino. You cannot Kiki-Jiki a Pia and Kieran because it's legendary, but again, you can Kiki a Siege Rhino. It's not legendary. Gain an extra 3 life, drain your opponent 3 life. Eternal Witness, you can Kiki-Jiki to create another Eternal Witness to return another card from your graveyard. You can Kiki-Jiki a Fulminator Mage, blow up the token Fulminator Mage, leaving your current Fulminator Mage alive. You could Kiki a Renegade Rallier, assuming there's a way to trigger Revolt that turn. Wall of Omens to draw a card. Same thing with Selfless Spirit as with Fulminator Mage. You can Kiki-Jiki your Selfless Spirit, sacrifice the token to give your creatures indestructible until end of turn, and then still have the original Selfless Spirit as well. Selfless Spirit is primarily in here as a quotable target, so that way if your opponent were to try and Wrath of God you, or Supreme Verdict you, Damnation, you can ideally Chord for the Selfless Spirit in response, and then sacrifice it to keep the rest of your creatures alive. Again, Kiki-Jiki can flicker a Wall of Omens to draw cards, flicker a Wall of Roots to reset its counters, flicker a Kasali Pride Mage so that you can sacrifice the token to blow up an artifact rather than blow up the original. So again, lots of interaction and synergy with all these cards. Even worst case, you could flicker a Birds of Paradise because it has haste. You can get an extra mana for the turn if that were something that were to come up. The last card in the deck is Revelark. It's another one of those cards that essentially can be triggered by Kiki-Jiki or Restoration Angel. It's 5 CMC. It's a 4/3 flyer. But when it leaves the battlefield, you can return up to 2 target creatures with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. You can also evoke it for 6, which will cause it to immediately leave the battlefield once you evoke. The cards that it can hit and return to the battlefield are Kiki-Jiki itself, Pia and Kieran, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Eternal Witness, Fulminator Mage, Selfless Spirit, Wall of Omens, Scavenging Ooze, Wall of Roots, Kasali Pride Mage, Voice of Resurgence, and Birds of Paradise. So again, a Restoration Angel, if you were to have just played a Revel Arc, or say you Eldritch Evolutioned into a Revel Arc at some point, you could then cast a Restoration Angel to have it leave the battlefield, return to the battlefield. When it leaves the battlefield, you'll get that trigger to return up to 2 creatures with power 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. So again, a lot of really cool stuff you can do with this deck. Let's move to the sideboard. This is going to be a really long preview. Deck tech. So sideboard is typically going to be quite a few bullets. In terms of the bullets, actually we could kind of break this up a little differently. There are 5 bullets that I'm playing currently. Obviously there are lots of cards that can become appropriate depending on the meta. Bullets are Burnt-In Forge Tender, protection from red, sacrifice Burnt-In Forge Tender, prevent all damage a red source of your choice would deal this turn. You can use this against burn, you can use this against like Anger of the Gods to protect your creatures, against a Pyroclasm, etc. And it's really easily chordable. It only takes 4 CMC to chord for this guy, and it can again chord at instant speed. Reclamation Sage, another chordable target when you need another way to handle artifact or enchantment destruction. The other thing about Reclamation Sage versus Kasali Pridemage, there's a couple different cards like Torpor Orb. They don't get a ton of play right now, but at times have been popular. Torpor Orb, Reclamation Sage cannot do anything for, because enter the battlefield triggers don't happen with Torpor Orb. And so Kasali Pridemage is better against that card. But then there's other cards like Damping Matrix, which I believe shuts down activated abilities. Yeah, activated abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So Reclamation Sage is better against a card like Damping Matrix, where Kasali Pridemage can't destroy it. So just different ways of fighting different things. An extra Fulminator Mage where you really need to fight lands. Orzhov Pontiff is a good way to wipe out token decks or lots of 1/1 creatures. Can also be used to chord, to pump your team if you have a lot of creatures to go wide for a lethal attack. Spellskite, a wide plethora of things that it's useful against. So again, another somewhat cheap chordable card. Surgical Extraction, just to fight a lot of the graveyard-centric type decks. Collective Brutality. Surgical Extraction, also good. If you can, get rid of an opponent's combo piece and then use that Surgical Extraction to exile a combo piece. A little difficult in this existing build, but sometimes you can hit it with a Collective Brutality. Somehow it's showing me an extra Collective Brutality that shouldn't be in that list. There we go. Looks like Magic's glitching out. Collective Brutality is just a way to try and break up your opponent's hand, maybe gain some extra life when you need to gain life against maybe burn. Also, some spot removal at -2/-2 to target creature. Similarly, Path to Exile, that gives you an extra way to, you can bring your 4th Path to Exile if you need more creature removal. Slaughter Games, an uncounterable sorcery extraction effect where you name a non-land card, basically go exile all those cards from your opponent's hands. Since we ramp pretty well, this is a good way to fight ad nauseum type decks, or potentially like a Grizzlebrand or Emrakul type deck. Stony Silence, excellent against Lantern Control, Affinity, Tron, etc. You shut down their ability to activate the abilities, activate their artifacts abilities, and so basically gives you lots and lots of time. A lot of people run 3 Stony Silence, and it's possible that's the right number, but I think this deck also has the ability to fight with the Spellskite and the Pia and Kirans, and just the general flyers that the deck has, the ability to fight Affinity pretty well anyway. And Blessed Alliance, again, more life gain if you need it. It's possible that at this point, because Infect and the old Death Shadow decks that would attack with one creature for a big amount of damage are less prevalent with the Gitaxian Probe ban, it's possible that Blessed Alliance could just be a lone missionary at this point, which could gain 4 life, but it does offer some other value in terms of untapping target creatures for surprise blockers, or again, you can still use it as an extra removal spell. That's effective against like a Reality Smasher or something like that. And again, I don't know why this Collective Brutality keeps showing up. Actually, is acting like I have 14 cards on the sideboard. We'll see what happens here. Now it thinks I have 4. Lastly, the mana base. This mana base is basically taken straight from Jeff Hoogland versions of Kiki Chord. Murmuring Bosk is kind of the one noticeable card, because it is fetchable. It is a forest, so you can fetch for it, and it offers you access to 3 different types of mana colors. Horizon Canopy is relevant because it is a way to draw you a card, and with Renegade Rallier you can actually crack this to draw a card, and if you have the mana to cast Renegade Rallier, then return the Horizon Canopy back to the battlefield immediately. Raging Ravine, just another creature in case you occasionally need that. And I think that's pretty much it. This is a very, very long deck tech. I may end up having to redo it based on the length, but I just wanted to make sure we went over everything. So maybe I'll do a short version as well, but this'll be the in-depth version for folks who care. Hopefully you enjoy. I'm gonna run this deck through a league, and we'll have the videos up soon.